Yeah, pleasure to talk to everyone this morning. The topic really, I guess, or the title of the section was the dawn of 5G and what that means for our sort of data center sector. So, obviously I'll talk a little bit more about it as I get into it, but I thought, first of all, let's just give you a little bit of introduction to myself and kind of, I guess, what I do in our business. So technology director at Pulsant, we're a UK data center provider. I'll talk a little bit more about Pulsant in a second. I currently sort of lead a technology team of cloud network architects in our business, but really my primary role is to make sure the technology that we adopt align with the products that we're selling that align with the market that we're selling into. So been sort of collectively with the business now for since 2016, over 20 years experience in I guess technology and operational teams. So I would say sort of engineer by trade, but if you can't do it, teach it. So I didn't last too long in the engineering part of it. Really good to talk to you about it. I guess, whilst that's what I am, I suppose what it's important to say is kind of what I'm not. So I'm here sort of talking about sort of telecom 5G, but that's not my background. I'm not a telecoms, I'm not 5G. So forgive a little bit of poetic license as we go through this, but I'm just kind of sharing my views on how I see that industry developing and actually what that means for us in the sort of data center space as well. Okay, so let me kind of get into this, I guess. So really the next sort of few minutes really for me is to give you a little bit of introduction to Pulsant, just to kind of give you a bit of our background. And then actually leads really well to from Daniel's presentation there, but just kind of talk about what I think network edge means in this, and actually how the transformation of the mobile network generally, but certainly in the UK can map into that. And from there, kind of what I'm looking at as the opportunity for us. So yeah. I always love animated slides when you present. So a little bit on Pulsant. We're, as I said, we're a UK data center provider, and what we're really kind of looking at is delivering the UK Edge platform, but primarily helping customers on that digital journey. We're seeing the adoption of cloud over the last, X number of years, and customers being more comfortable with the adoption of SaaS and cloud services. But still at our heart and heritage of the business is a 12 data center site, nicely spread across the UK. We've got good east-west coast coverage, but predominantly the map there shows our locations compared to sort of the main business conurbations in the UK. And fundamentally, we're about the 3 C's, so co-location, cloud, and connectivity. And when we're out to talk to our customers, a couple of the sort of headlines that really sort of that we'll point to as we go through those conversations and understand what our customers' needs are. We'll talk about the location of our DCs in terms of being able to reach that sort of their offices. That low latency piece from sort of fixed connectivity is certainly key to us. But as we kind of talk less around co-location, more about sort of cloud, and we'll start to get into some of the edge use cases. But we've got we take a sort of agnostic view to cloud. Yes, we run our own private cloud, but we've got Megaport connected DCs. We'll have a single pane of glass cloud management platform, which allows our customers to look at both their public and private clouds, giving a real true hybrid view of cloud. And then we've got some really interesting stuff going on with sustainability. Maybe a topic for another day, but cutting our carbon emissions by half by 2030. We've joined the net zero by 2050 schemes as well. So that is Pulsant. So I think really that sort of the main thrust of kind of what I want to sort of share and talk through today is the opportunity that 5G should bring and will bring. And the title of the presentation was The Dawn of 5G, and it's actually been with us now since probably the late 2018, 2019, but we don't really see those sort of use cases developing. We don't see that changing the industry drastically at the moment. We hear a lot about certain cities with 5G and we're getting faster speeds, but we're still seeing some of the challenges of actually how do we kind of make 5G part and parcel of what we're going to do. And I kind of see that 5G connectivity essential for some of the edge use cases that will start to develop over over the coming months and years. So let me kind kind of explain how I'm seeing it and how I'm thinking about it. And as I said at the beginning, allow me some poetic license as I kind of go into this. I'm not looking to rewrite the rules of connectivity. So how do I think about the network edge? From some of our discussions with our partners and our sort of carriers and mobile providers that we do work with, some of the work that we've done here. I mean, it's there's nothing new to this. So if we think about a very traditional way of how our customers would see connectivity, customers don't necessarily realize that what edge is or the edge opportunity at the moment, but they're very comfortable in terms of connectivity. So we might have end users, and more importantly, as we go forward, we'll start to talk about end devices as we see the sort of growth of IoT and so on and so forth. They'll typically connect on some sort of local network, local area networks. It's Wi-Fi. On-prem connectivity, and very comfortable with adopting services through the internet and adopting hyperscale cloud and SaaS providers. Office 365 obviously being a very good example of how quick we moved away from things like on-prem exchange into SaaS-based exchange services. So I'm kind of looking at the network edge as sitting in the middle of that. Customers today are very comfortable with their network being connected through a carrier provider, a data center provider. They understand the concepts of core network to their wide area network. They're very comfortable with private cloud that sits in those data centers. They're very comfortable moving their application away from the users and putting into some of those data centers. So I kind of think about network edge in that box. And what kind of doesn't fit into this box in today is the connectivity from those edge devices or the end devices, end users over the mobile networks. So my interpretation of kind of 4G as it sits today looks something like that. And we all see the cell towers. We all know how our mobiles connect and how our devices connect. That's all understood, and those cell towers will all come back to a sort of aggregation point for these broadband units. And typically, whilst there are some different sort of options around that in terms of decentralized and centralized options, that traffic is taken back through the mobile network operator's core and typically ends up on the internet. So we could have a device that's relatively close distance-wise with our offices, but is actually going back through a mobile network operator's core. Some of that MNO equipment could be in our DCs today, but it ultimately transiting back out to the internet. And then it kind of comes back round and goes back into that DC and goes back into that server or that application and back to that end user through that traditional network. So we've naturally got some inefficiencies there. It works today. We don't have the in some of those traditional applications. We don't necessarily see the big demands on latency, but it's certainly it's an inefficient route, and that sort of I guess the technology that sits with that doesn't sort of interoperate in the same way that we think about maybe some of the fixed connectivity that we have today in our DCs, where we talk about network-to-network interfaces and being able to get connectivity very easily within our data centers and meet multiple carriers. It doesn't work in the same way as things stand. So kind of the hope is that the 5G as it transforms kind of comes into that. And how I'm kind of interpreting that change and what that kind of really brings to us with 5G network is actually more about the Open RAN initiatives that are going on, so Open Radio Networks, and then actually on top of that is then the ability to virtualize some of that. So with Open RAN, we're seeing the breakdown of broadband unit into its component parts, and more importantly, separating it from the hardware that runs that infrastructure into software and hardware. And you can see now that going on the same track that for many years we've done with compute and virtualization and splitting those layers apart. So it gives the opportunity for network interaction and compute interaction at a front haul piece around those cell towers and those aggregation points, and it gives a further sort of interaction point and within sort of that near edge, and we're effectively creating a mid haul now before we hit that back haul into the MNO space. So if we kind of think about that transformation of that network edge and that edge data center piece, and being able to tap into that centralized unit that sits in DCs today, and how can we kind of look at using some of that equipment to tap into the network at that point. If our customers are already in those data centers at that point, we can start to think about how we can reduce that latency, and we can start to move move that connectivity closer to the point. So we kind of talk about the principle of at the moment, as things stand, we do to go 1 mile. We end up doing 100 miles around the UK. We certainly don't have some of the same challenges that in terms of distance that we probably see in Australia. So, but we remove that inefficient routing, and I think as we start to see the use cases develop, that becomes more of a requirement. So I can see at the moment some of the hyperscalers already starting to think about how can we leverage that, and we're starting to see those sort of AWS wavelength and some of the mobile providers hosting their MECs in those data centers and being able to really leverage that. And if we kind of think what the hyperscalers are doing, the mobile network operators want to get deeper into the network as we go forward. And I suppose, how do I think about that? Why do I think that's going to be a requirement, and why latency will become more of a challenge than we necessarily see today? Some of the use cases that probably been mentioned throughout the yesterday and will continue today, but we see sort of I think about the films and CCTV where you've got real-time panning of pan and zoom cameras. We all know in reality, for those who sort of operate a pan and zoom camera, if you're trying to chase a criminal down the street, and it's not going to be that quick, right? The latency and everything else of those network cameras just isn't there. So there's going to be sort of growing demand for that. Augmented reality, being able to kind of see real time what's going on. So we're going to have to bring some of that network traffic closer to the devices that are. We don't need to be backhauling all that traffic up through the internet and back around to our data centers. So I think we will see the use cases go from there. And I said, right, well, if that's kind of what's happening, there's an interesting piece of research done recently that we sort of tapped into, and kind of where those locations of this disaggregated network equipment can potentially sit and how that might change. And this really starts to drive into what I think becomes our opportunity. So if we talk about where that network edge sits across those main areas you see on the screen at the moment, so naturally the cell towers and things are not going to change. That radio head unit will always remain there. But actually, there's an opportunity for sort of access and transport aggregation and tapping into that mobile network as those MNOs start to get deeper into the network, as I've discussed. So potentially we think about today aggregation of those radio towers, probably coming back to a street cabinet or some sort of location that makes sense within that, back to some sort of exchange central office within the mobile provider, and then typically their core network through some of the DC providers that we see today. As that starts to break out and those systems start to break out, we'll probably start to see the increase of open RAN mobile providers and trying to get their equipment into these different places. There's an opportunity there potentially for, depending on locations of your data centers, potentially for DCs even at that access aggregation point, but certainly the transport aggregation. I can start to see the network-to-network interface piece being available within those edge-enabled data centers, and still, where required, that backhaul, but being able to tap into potentially cloud on-ramps at the earlier stage, get closer connectivity to public cloud, but closer connectivity to those customer servers, private clouds, and infrastructure that they're already running within that. So I think the capability of the technology is there, but there's kind of barriers, and these things aren't moving forward. As I mentioned, we're now into sort of the fourth year of 5G being really available, and I think it's a chicken and egg. So the demand will be driven by the applications and the need for that lower latency. And whilst it's not there, there's no need for the mobile operators to kind of move closer into that. But as we start to develop those things, the demand will increase. So we're early in that adoption piece. But also I can potentially see, and happy to kind of get views and opinions around this, but typically as service providers and data center providers, we have a closer relationship with the system integrators, the ISVs, developers of some of these applications, which probably don't traditionally sit with maybe the telco and the mobile providers. So some of the work that we see going on, there's maybe a bit of an air gap there that is not really being sort of taken into consideration as we go forward. So I guess that kind of leads me on to sort of think about what the opportunity is for us really, and I could probably sit and list, the number of sort of smart cases and smart and edge opportunities that we all want to see come through, and as I say, that have been talked about through the course of these 2 days. But the reality is that we need to have those conversations. Okay, we need to kind of keep identifying the use cases, understand what's there. The needs will grow, and as those use cases grow, so will the demand to kind of that network to perform better. The requirement for using 4-5G and being able to communicate with those end devices will become more and more apparent. And then kind of if I flip that around the other way from sort of the customer, the client use case, actually how do we think about the carriers in our data centers and what that future proposition might look like for that? So we have a typical probably rack-based relationship, I guess, in many of our sort of carrier relationships today. But we're going to see probably a greater demand from what the MNOs are doing today, where they're looking. They'll look to get deeper into the network. But there'll also be the creation of these, open RAN mobile providers that will look to be taking advantage of that separation of hardware and software layer from through that mobile equipment to be able to host that closer to in close locations in different data centers. I touched very briefly the fact that with Open RAN there's also virtual RAN, and for those of us who are cloud providers and everything else, whilst I'm sure there is certain elements of technical detail of the compute that's required to run that, but it is just another transformation that we've seen through the industry over the years anyway, that we will adopt those virtual centralized units, those virtualized distributed units, and there will need to be compute to run that. Will those providers be looking to run their own hardware if they can set up as a virtual MNO? No, they'll be looking for a provider to offer that compute and that capability. So there's a real opportunity there to kind of think about how that shapes the proposition for our carriers and our mobile operators. And then my final point there is really about understanding how we can maybe help facilitate or even bridge that relationship. We will typically have, and I'm sure we're not alone, in terms of who sits in our data centers, but we're a hotspot for allowing people to meet each other. We've got independent software vendors, we've got system integrators, we've got managed service providers. All these people that kind of they'll be on the front line with the use cases that are coming through from those clients, and we can kind of facilitate those relationships between what those demands are and what the carriers need to provide. And that creates that opportunity really to start to drive those networks closer together. So I think the kind of takeaway message for me on that is we've got to think about those use case developments, but also what that offering is for the carriers. I think I'm quite happy to kind of hear thoughts on how these things are going to develop and how close that is. But that's kind of my view of how 5G will hopefully start to transform in the coming years, and we can make some use of that.
Thanks very much, Mike. Sorry, I also had a bit of a lag issue there. So just a couple of questions before we move to the next session, if you're happy. So you were talking about this kind of, we're in this chicken and the egg kind of situation, but as it stands, I know we haven't really felt the full repercussions of 5G. Do you think sort of the network, the infrastructure in the UK at the moment is ready for what we could potentially see happening over the next few years, or how do we stand? And if not, what should we be doing to get ready?
Yeah, so I think probably from an infrastructure point of view, we probably are ready. But I guess why hasn't it happened is my main point in there, and it is that chicken and egg scenarios we've talked about. Sorry, I seem to have lost the Zoom control panel. Stop sharing, so it's so I'll knock the slide off in a second. So yeah, I think the infrastructure is absolutely there to be able to support this. I think we've been running this in the fixed connectivity market for many years. So it is the demand that will start to shift that thinking. There's no need at the moment to get deeper into the network. There's no need to necessarily see that shift because we haven't got the demands being driven on those lower latency. But we're all having those conversations on, we can all see the need for that to happen. We can all see the need to get near real-time communication. That there's obviously talk of 6G and real-time becoming a thing there, but actually, if we can't leverage 5G at this stage, actually we're definitely not going to start to leverage that capability in 6G. So I think certainly from a UK perspective, I can't really talk from other countries. I think our infrastructure, we're very close. We've got a good array of backhaul networks, connectivity between our DCs. I think actually we've got a great opportunity for whether it's upcoming Open RAN MNO providers or the main providers to actually think about how they get deeper into the network and leverage some of that connectivity that exists.
And I know Daniel was talking about that sort of digital divide in Australia, but we kind of have that in the UK as well, don't we? This like kind of north-south thing. So how do you think this is going to work in terms of the UK, with us wanting to boost connectivity in the north, and how will that play out with 5G and the edge in the UK?
So I think I have a kind of again it's funny following a presentation from Australia, because I guess challenge is somewhat dwarfed by the size and scale of that, right? So, but actually even in the UK we've got everything is very dependent on London. We have a lot of our traffic. Some of our another I guess edge use case that we're working with at the moment is around virtual reality, and we've got an organisation close to north of the border in Scotland, and they're really struggling with the concepts of traffic moving all the way down to London to come back up, and the demands of their applications there. And so I think there's an underlying piece about how we move infrastructure further north, and we're starting to see sort of adoption in Manchester, and certainly Scotland's starting to grow in that way. So I think there is a general shift around that demand is already starting to drive stuff from a fixed point of view in terms of internet connectivity, and I think once that's in place, it naturally sets the scene for 5G to follow.
Brilliant, thank you. And then just one final question. I don't know how much. Sorry, I just think we've got a question from the audience, I think. Okay, so this is from Adele. From the audience, can we say that financial viability of the Edge CD deployment is the major challenge for telecom operators? Can we have an idea about the main enablers to have successful deployment of the Edge data center?
Yeah, that's good question. I mean, I guess again, there's the sort of financial requirement commitment. It probably takes us back to my chicken and egg point, really. I kind of get it. I think, why would we do that today? What does it mean? We're working with a couple of other providers. I had a conversation just the last couple of weeks about some of their investment into Manchester, and starting to see some things go there, and how they're seeing the development of IoT. And actually, that's probably as close as they want to get at the moment, and it's working for them. But it's shown actually where there might be traditionally they'd have thought, right, we'll keep this in London, we'll work from there. They've now got a demand with a customer with a number of X thousand of SIMs going into device in there, and the latency was starting to become a challenge. That deployment in Manchester has kind of helped some of those devices. So I don't think we're going to see huge use cases in the next 3 to 6 months that are going to say, right, go and create that infrastructure. But there's a do you look at this as a sort of field of dreams, build it and they will come? But we are going to we've got to get close to those ISVs, understand what applications have been developed, understand what those needs are. And I think we've seen how quick some of the SaaS software elements grow, and how quickly they move forward. So we've got to be ready to kind of move on it. But it's difficult to kind of financially justify at the moment. I haven't done the numbers, but yeah, I absolutely share the view there. So.
And so we're still in a bit of unknown territory. So I'll feel.
Sorry, yeah, lights have just gone out. It's absolutely still unknown territory. So I'll just throw another question again. I don't know how much you'll have insight on, but in terms of as 5G grows and as kind of devices are connecting globally, what's that going to mean in terms of regulation of data? If it's over various countries and over various borders, and are data centers ready for that kind of to adapt to those kind of regulations, because they're going to be very complex, I imagine. Absolutely. Well, and again, we say data sovereignty today, and I think it's a really good point. And actually, that's another area that warrants the ability to be able to tap into those networks in a more localized geography. At the moment, yes, they're typically country by country. We'll backhaul traffic around the UK. There's internet by its nature, we'll go into its best route forward, but yeah, I think if you can start to be able to really talk about 5G and the ability to have a private network within that, and say, actually, within this locality, within this city, within this region, I know that I can my data isn't leaving that. I know it's going back to this one or two edge data center point. I know that I'm tapping in at this point. I can say my network is private, and I start to get some data sovereignty that I can then talk to from a compliance point of view and some assurity around it. Whereas at the moment, we're straight onto backhaul, and we're straight around 2-3 data centers around the UK and ultimately a public network.
Sorry, I just realised I muted myself. Wonderful, thanks, Mike. I'm sorry that you were in a bit of a hot seat there while we fired you a ton of questions at you, but that was wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us today. It was a wonderful session. So thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, everyone, and appreciate the time.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.